All right. All right. Anybody guess the name of that? You
No
didn't
idea.
expect to name that tune when you walk in. Crown Imperial by
Oh,
William Walton. Why
okay.
did I play it? Because it's got a great tuba part. I'm just saying, great tuba part. Welcome everyone to the Wisconsin Creativity Summit. We are so pleased to have you with us. We are going to record this because there's a number of folks that have requested to see this over and over again, multiple times. So
Well, that happens every time we present corporate, doesn't it, Chris? It's the the number of requests we get is actually
yeah,
embarrassing.
it's
Yeah.
embarrassing. People just want to just see it again and again. So we're going to honor that request and you can get a copy of this to your heart's content. So thank you for being with us tonight. We are here tonight, and we're going to do some introductions here, but just to share with you quickly our goals. One is to talk about and have a great conversation about the essential role that creativity plays, especially as we move into uh, what's the word, Peter? What kind of future is this?
Hopefully a little better,
Hopefully a little better. Definitely more
a
complex,
little
though,
more
right?
optimistic. Yeah.
Yep,
A
like
little
it.
more acknowledging of the individual brilliance that lies within everybody. Little things like that, Chris, I come to
Little,
my mind.
little things. I love it. That's good. Write that down. We're off to a great start already. And obviously to celebrate the life and work
Mm.
of as our dear friend Sir Ken Robinson, who passed away 5 years ago now to
Yeah.
this day. And so it's our honor
Mm.
to honor him and
Mm.
to in the work that it's still, man, it's as important today as it ever was, if not more important. And his words still echo and reverberate. So we pay homage to him and his great work. So we're going to start with some introductions here. I'm going to challenge my colleague here, who is co-hosting with me, along with our special guest, when we do our introductions here, to maybe start with our connection to Sir Ken. That'd be kind of a fun way to start that off. And then we're going to launch right into our interview with Bob Morrison, who we're honored to have with us tonight. And then we'll end the evening with just a brief little honoring the work of Ken Robinson again, and we'll be done for those of you who are fans in time for the kickoff. So
Yeah.
some didn't know they were playing, and it's fine. Um, so I am Chris Gleason. I'm the Arts and Creativity Director, consultant with the Department of Public Instruction here in Wisconsin. Been in this position for 4 years, taught for 25 years in Wisconsin, and an honor to be with you. My connection to Sir Ken Robinson was hearing his TED Talk, which millions of us did, and my world changed. It
Mm.
literally changed. And I actually, with some friends, we flew to Hong Kong to do workshops in Hong Kong. And I remember transcribing every word of that TED Talk on the flight.
Mm.
I wrote down
Okay.
every word. So just like a jazz musician. And then I
Yeah.
realized he had written books and read everything he ever wrote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had the honor of talking to him on the phone. Um, uh, one time, met him a couple times, but had a nice long conversation, which I cherish to this day, which was really an absolute joy.
Mm.
So let's bring over my co-host, who's been with us, I believe, for every single one of these that we started 4 years ago. This is Dr. Peter Gamwell. Peter.
Well, it's great to be here, everybody, and welcome. Um, in 1990, I was in Newfoundland and Labrador. I was at that point I'd become the arts consultant, and I'd heard about this conference in Toronto, the Arts in Education. And when I looked at the cast of characters, I didn't notice Sir Ken. What I did notice was people like the award-winning chemist from Manchester, England, John Polanyi, Maeva Moore, the Canadian academic, and a whole host of people from business. They had this smart idea: bring together a diverse group of people from all sorts of different backgrounds, talking about the essential nature of the arts for humanity. So get there, I'm sitting in the audience, and this fella is talking, and I had no idea that anybody else thought this way. Um, it was to Ken, of course. And one of the things that he said was this: just because just about every educational organization in the world organizes around a framework like a league table with mathematics and language at the top, the arts at the bottom, it doesn't mean they're right. This was in 1990. And he blew me away. So I introduced myself to him after that. And we're both from Liverpool. I didn't realize that at the time. And I said, we don't know each other, but I suspect, or I hope we're going to. He said, well, which football team do you support? And I said, Everton. He said, okay, let's go for a beer. If I'd said Liverpool, wouldn't have happened. Anyway, that was my introduction to Sir Ken.
Love it. Well, we're honored to have you back with us again, Peter. And he's speaking of wonderful books. Peter's got some brilliant writing and so on. The Wonderwall is a brilliant read as well. So please
Thanks.
do look into that as well. Our guest this evening, and we're honored to have him with us, is Bob Morrison. Now, I was writing out his introduction and then found this video. It does it better.
Robert B. Morrison is the founder and former chairman of the Music for All Foundation, which merged with Bands of America in 2006 to create today's nonprofit educational program organization, Music for All, where he remains chairman emeritus. The foundation was created by Mr. Morrison and his family to focus on expanding the role of music and the arts in education, to heighten the public's appreciation of the value of music and arts education, and to create a positive environment for the arts through societal change. Bob Morrison has been a leading force in support of music education throughout his career. He is the founder and CEO of Quadrant Research, the nation's leading arts education research organization. His effort through Quadrant Research has created a deep body of research and policy work which have directly impacted millions of students. Previously, Mr. Morrison helped develop and then served as the first CEO of the VH1 Save the Music Foundation. He was a senior executive for NAMM, the International Music Products Association, where he also served as executive director of the American Music Conference. He worked with the late Michael Kamen and Richard Dreyfuss to create the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation. Mr. Morrison was a founding member of the National Coalition for Music Education and is recognized for his work to add the arts to our nation's education goals, including his leadership and work with the Teach Music Coalition. Congratulations to 2024 Music for All Hall of Fame member, Robert Morrison.
Yeah, that video did pretty well. And I would say, let's give you 2025 as well. I think you should get 2 years of the Hall of Fame. Let's do it again. Get him 2026 as well. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Bob Morrison. Thank you for being here, Bob.
Hey, thank you all. It's great to be with everyone, and it's great to see some of my longtime friends and colleagues. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Michael George there, my good friend. It's great to see you as always. That's how far back I go with Wisconsin. It's when Mike was prattling around out there, giving them hell, making sure that music had their rightful place, within the state, and also, providing leadership nationally as well. I first met Ken before he was Sir Ken and before he had a TED Talk. He had just moved to the United States from England because he was appointed to Getty. And he was coming over as the director of education for the Getty Center in Los Angeles. And there was a dear friend of mine, Lizzie Moore, was the executive director of a nonprofit in Los Angeles called PS Arts. And she ended up babysitting for Ken. She, on the side, she would babysit for people. Like and this is crazy. She babysat for Larry David and his wife and their kids, right? And Sir Ken, I'm like, how do you end up babysitting for famous people's kids? I mean, it was, kind of crazy. So, but she said, I met this person that I'm babysitting for. You really need to meet him. You need to talk to him. So she organized an opportunity for me to meet up with Ken at the NAMM show. I think it was in I think it was 2002 or 2003, and I was still at Save the Music at the time. And so there was a little conference room that they had set up for us to meet, and we had 15 minutes scheduled, for our conversation. Well, 2 hours later, we decided that we would wrap up our 15-minute conversation, and that was the beginning of our lifelong friendship together. And I'm always grateful to Lizzie for that because just as Chris has said, he's had a profound impact on my life, on my work, on my thinking regarding creativity and the arts and their role in education. And it's rarely a day would go by where I'm not thinking about him. I mean, there's something that comes up that always reminds me of him, and so that's how I got introduced to him. So that's about 2002, and then we were fast friends, and he became someone that I would go for advice and counsel, and then I became somebody that he came to for ideas or counsel and certain things that he was thinking about. So it was incredibly fortunate that he came in and has played such an important role in not only my professional life but my personal life as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's
Mm.
fantastic. So, Bob, let's talk about creativity and let's launch right into it. What does that word mean to you?
Well, I mean, I don't think that anyone has defined it any clearer than Ken did himself, and he defines it as the process of having original ideas that have value. Straight and to the point. The
Mhm.
process of having original ideas that have value. And he liked to break it down, because you think that, wow, that's pretty simple, but think through it, because a process is not a single event, right? So it's not just a single event. It is a process. It's not a flash of inspiration, but an ongoing process of generating and developing and refining ideas. And then there's the aspect of it being original. Now, original didn't necessarily mean that it had never been thought of, but it needed to be original to that person, right? So to them, it was a novel idea. And then it has to have value, right? It has to be useful or valuable in some way, and not just new for newness sake. Um, and along the line, and I know that Peter's heard this a number of times. He liked to talk. He didn't talk about creativity in isolation. So it wasn't like, creativity was just this thing. Okay, go be creative. But creativity was part of this continuum, and we would talk about it in terms of the ICI continuum, and that was really this idea of imagination inspires creativity. Creativity inspires innovation. And that was the ICI continuum. And when you think about it, it really makes a lot of sense because before you can create something, you have to imagine it, right? So this idea of imagination, okay, you've
Mhm.
got this idea, but you can have lots of ideas and nothing happens to them, and then they just go into the ether, right? So they don't drive any creative process; they just go away. So he would like to talk about creativity as applied imagination, right? So this idea that once you have imagined something, then you've got to get to work in, okay, how do we then apply that? And that's where he came up with this idea of imagination putting to work, generating those original ideas that have value. And then he looked at innovation as being applied creativity. So that's the ICI continuum. So you have imagination, creativity is applied imagination, and innovation is applied creativity. And that really has resonated, with me from the time that we were first, talking about it in several of the meetings that we had over the years through National Creativity Network and, work that had gone on before that in Oklahoma, with Creative Oklahoma, and then working on the Creativity Initiative in Wisconsin, which then led to the collective work on the World Creativity Forum that was held in Oklahoma City back in 2010. So that's really how I come at it is, it's like, what could be better than his own definition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, I love that framing, by the way, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I've looked at lots of definitions of creativity, and some of them are very long, but none of them were more beautifully concise than Sir Ken's. And it is
Yeah.
it's so simple. It's like an Occam's razor descriptor. One of the things, I mean, I've been kicking around the education system from, kindergarten to superintendent of leadership for more years than I care to think about. And one of the things, there's an expression in my hometown of Liverpool, which is, does my head in, is the number of people, brilliantly creative people, who come through the school system, emerge from it, and they have not a clue about the brilliant creativity that they have within themselves. What do we get wrong about creativity in our school systems, Bob?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Ken would like to talk about the fact that, um, our children come into our schools, bursting with creativity and energy and ideas and, just all sorts of energy and enthusiasm. And, it sometimes seems like our goal in education is to just beat that stuff right out of them, right? So that they come out the other side where they're no longer creative, but they've been, stifled through that environment. And I think that, one of the things that schools, often get wrong about creativity is that they don't value it, right? There's not the same value placed on it. And again, you look at, what gets measured gets valued. They talk about, here in the United States, you know, we've launched, since the 2000s into this, crazy testing regime that has gone on that has really stifled a lot of creativity in education because, we're now trying to make sure that everyone can conform and think and produce the right answers based on a set of questions. So, we're teaching to the test. We're no longer teaching the student. And I think that has become really problematic. And I think the other thing that a lot of people get wrong, and I think it's one of the things that Ken did a really good job of bringing to light is that creativity is a skill that can be developed in anyone. This idea that, you're only creative if you were born with it. Oh, I wasn't born with that creative gene. I can't be. And this idea that, creativity is just this specialized thing that's off over the side, whereas, it's everywhere and it's in everyone. And it's not a matter of whether it's there or not. It's a matter of whether it's uncovered or not. It's whether you've created an environment of exploration where that individual can identify and find their creative spark. Or as Ken would like to say by the book of the same name, finding your element. What is that element? What is the thing that brings you joy and spark and passion that is worth your lifelong pursuit? So I think that's one of the key things that has always resonated with me. And I've seen this in my role. I've spent 12 years as a school board member of a large regional school district here in New Jersey, including time as not only president of that board, but on the board of directors of the New Jersey School Boards Association. So I've seen it, from inside the institution, from an administrative standpoint, just how sometimes we get these things wrong, because the incentive system in the United States for what is rewarded in education does not reward necessarily creativity.
Absolutely. It's the same here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think it's the same in a lot of places, that to a certain degree, I think that we've lost our way, and certainly the direction that we're heading in today, particularly in the United States, and I'm not sure of how this plays in other parts of the world, but we're on a slippery slope right now of really focusing more on generating worker bees than citizens.
Ironic, isn't
And
it? Mm.
yeah, it's really eye-opening, and we'll talk about it later when as we go on. But I think that a lot of what Ken had talked about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, is even more relevant today with some of the conversations that are going on, because there's a real disconnect between what our businesses say they need and what they really need, what they're articulating. We need, creative people. We need problem solvers. We need people that can work independently. We need people who can come up with that unusual solution, that illogical solution that a computer is not going to come up with, because they don't have the same way of looking at disparate things and coming up with the novel approach to address them. So I think the work's now more important than ever.
No, absolutely.
Well, I'm going to stay with that. I mean, both you and Peter knew Ken, very, very well. And I often think about what if he was still here and looking at the way, I remember in his first book, he was talking about how quickly and how rapidly technology was changing, and how this paradigm shift, we're in the midst of a revolution. I remember him saying that in what was it, Out of Our Minds, right? That book.
Out of Our Minds. Yep.
And I kind of just wonder if he was still here looking at AI and just everything else going on in the world, what might his takeaway be? And I mean, can you and Peter talk to that just a little bit? Like, what would he try to reinforce with us, or what would be his advice to us as we're on the brink of all this change?
Well, I think I'll go ahead and jump in, Peter.
Yeah.
I think that he would probably say, "I told you so." Right? And what I mean by that is he warned us. And look, and he's not one to brag, so I say that facetiously. He wouldn't necessarily go, "Well, I told you so." But this is an "I told you so" moment. The things he was concerned about then, the things that we talked of then, and that were lamented about then, have really come to fruition. And this gets back to this idea that we are at this crossroads between the rise of instrumentalism that is in conflict with humanism, and it's raising its ugly head once again. And actually, I'm going to be publishing an article on this Monday, to address this specific topic of instrumentalism versus humanism. And just so folks understand, instrumentalist education treats schooling as production. Right? We're doing this so that we have folks that can be economically productive. Right? That's what instrumentalism looks at. Inputs go in, credentialed workers come out. Right? So we're creating the minions. The humanist education treats schooling as formation, the cultivation of a person capable of judgment, adaptation, and citizenship, being able to operate in conditions that no one can fully predict. And Ken would like to say this when he was speaking, and I'm sure Peter's heard the same story. But back in the early 2000s, Ken would like to quote a McKinsey report that showed between the 1940s and 2000 that many of the names in the S&P 500 have had gone out of business over that 60 years. And then he went on to say that by 2030, that McKinsey was projecting, and again, this is back in the early 2000s, that 75% of the S&P 500 would be made up of businesses whose names we do not know, that are in industries that have yet to be invented. This was 26 years ago.
Yeah.
And think about where we are today. The names of businesses that are now at the top of our S&P 500 that nobody had heard of, or they may not have even existed. And then think about some of the industries that have now emerged that we didn't even know were industries, right? And here they are taking things over. So it's interesting because today the turnover in the S&P 500 is 18 years. And during the middle part of the 1900s, the turnover was 60 years. That's how rapidly things are changing. And this is the environment that we are developing our students, that we're educating our students to come into. And the problem that we've had is that we're educating our students for this unknown environment, which means that education that centers creativity is best positioned to prepare our students for the future. Not this idea that we need to create these worker minions. And his prescription from 2004 is still relevant today, and it's from an interview that I did with him in 2004 for the Education Commission on the States, and it was looking at arts education and the creative economy. And he said in that article, and it's just as relevant today as it was back then, creativity is not a luxury. America needs a workforce that is flexible, adaptable, highly creative, and it needs an education system that can develop these qualities in everyone. That is so relevant today, just as it was back then, because we're in this environment where change is happening rapidly. And just think about it from the standpoint of how quickly things are evolving and how quickly things are changing. I don't know what it's like in Wisconsin necessarily, but a couple of years ago, everyone got into this. Everybody's got to learn to code. Everybody's got to have coding as part of their education. We've got to put coding in our middle schools, and everything's got to be tracking. And then what do we hear earlier this year? Nobody's coding. The machines are doing the coding. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a need for people who know how to code, because there will always be that. It just means that everybody doesn't need to know how to code, right? And so I want to be clear, particularly when I'm talking about instrumentalism, because it does have its place, and it should work in hand in glove with humanism. When Ken was working on his book, Creative Schools, he and I had a deep discussion about vocational education and the non-college bound learner, because of the fact that, at the time, there was this emphasis on, again, what gets rewarded is what our schools adapt to. So our schools were being rated based on what's the percentage of students that you send to a 4-year degree program, right? Mm-hmm. So our schools are incentivized to drive students into the university system. And at the time, then it had an impact on our vocational system because, as you hear today, if you hear Mike Rowe talking about, the vocational system and vocational education, there are all of these high-paying jobs that are available for students that don't need to go to college. They can go through a vocational track, and for many students, that's the way to go. That is their passion. That is their particular element. So I want to make sure that we understand that when I'm talking about the instrumentalism versus humanism, I'm not putting them necessarily in conflict, but the way people are talking about it today is putting them in conflict. Not everyone needs to go to college. Vocational training is important and should be valued more than we are today, but this is not a zero-sum game. It's not, if we have more vocational training, we have to have less arts training or less focus on creativity. Students who study vocational education benefit from from arts education just as much as anyone else. And I think that that's where oftentimes people miss the point. And I'd like to sum it up by the statement that I often use, and I actually have it because I'm including it in my article on Monday. We don't teach music and the arts to create great artists any more than we teach math to create the next generation of mathematicians or language arts to create the next generation of writers. We teach the arts in our schools to create great people so that they are empowered with the skills and knowledge to be successful in life, to do great things, regardless of the vocational pathway that they choose. Arts education is not about creating artists. And it's never been. I mean, that is a wonderful outcome that we benefit from. But the vast majority of our students are not going to go into the arts, but a lot of them that go and on to be successful in other aspects of their life often point back to the skills and experiences that they had in the arts that allowed them to be successful.
Mm. Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Wow.
Peter, you want to follow up?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just processing all of that. It's so interesting to hear that. The first word, I just wrote a word down when you posed the question, and the word was humanity. It would be a cautionary tale for Seken to have said, whatever we do with AI, humanity must remain at the core. I used to run these, I ran a creativity movement, which was very provocative. This is when I was the superintendent of leadership with the local school district. And I went on for 12 years. And we had 7 or 8 events each year. We were dancing this idea and pulsing it out through it. It was a very large district, 75,000 students, 7,000 staff. And at every one of these events, when you walked in, you didn't have to ask what it was about. We had creative initiatives from students, from community, from indigenous, from multicultural, all sorts of them, ranging from math to robotics to artwork to musicians, you name it. Anyway, on this, Seken came to, over the years, he came to 3 of these. He wouldn't just give a speech and leave, he would stay for the 3 days. It was amazing. And one of them we had at this huge high school, and with a bridge. And as you look down at the foyer, there were about 35, 40 different initiatives from different schools. And because everybody wanted a piece of Seken, but he saw the fireworks exhibition, and the fireworks exhibition was a group of students with physical handicaps from the high school. He saw them and he made a beeline, and we couldn't get him away from them. And nor should we have done. He didn't just talk about humanity. He couldn't help himself. He lived it to his very core. So that I'm sure would be his central message. Whatever we do, hold on to the humanity. Hold on to the idea that everybody. Holy chip! I thought it appeared. How did you manage that, Gleason?
I know. It's pretty good,
I
right?
take it all back. I take it
Yeah.
all back. You do have a spark of genius.
Okay. Thank you. Recorded too. Thank you.
I'm now feeling guilty, Chris. All these years I've been
I know.
calling you not very nice things. That's
I know.
amazing. That's it. That's the fireworks program. Of all things that brilliant teacher got them to do, to work with tiny, tiny little stones to make jewelry. Amazing. But he was engaged in conversations with those kids for about half an hour. Oh, this one, go back. See all the students behind him on the stage? We asked him, would you do that? We'd asked other speakers if they would do it. No, they wouldn't speak with 100 students on the stage. He said, bring them on. You should have heard the banter between him and those kids. And of course, once the kids got that he had this hard-edged sense of humor, well, they gave it back to him. It was hilarious. Humanity. So, I mean, you said it, Bob. I've just said it in a different way.
Completely agree.
So, Bob, let's talk a little bit about this. You know, we're going to go a little bit farther than this, and we're going to talk about the long history of thinking intentionally about creativity including the Wisconsin Task Force on arts and creativity and education. And, again, we have Mike George with us as well. But what lessons from that work should we revisit today?
Well, I think it's worth going back and revisiting it, to begin with. First of all, go back and look at, okay, what were the goals, what were the objectives that the task force was trying to achieve at the time, and then be reflective about it. How did we do? What has, based on those ideas, what has changed for the better? And are there some areas where there are still opportunities that remain unmet? And so I think that it would be, a useful exercise to go back through it and say, okay, this is what we said this was going to look like back in, what was that, 2008, 2009, when those conversations were going on. What is that, how have we done? And based on where we are today, what should we be doing? Because I think that today, and this particular time in our history, is the most opportune and relevant time to go back and take a look at it to see what it is that you can do, to build upon the successes that came out of that, which I know that there were several, but things that still need to be achieved, to try to address the overarching goals more thoroughly as you move forward, and in this rapidly changing environment that we've already spoken about.
Can I change it up a little bit? A couple of things. The first one I'm going to ask is this. There are times when I think that as arts teachers, or within the arts education structure, we have a capacity to shoot ourselves in the foot, because we say that we
You
want
think?
the arts. Oh, that was good. Oh, now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Sorry,
no,
Peter.
we say that we want the arts for everybody, and then we put parameters around that, and we put so much emphasis on competition that a lot of the kids get excluded, and we lose a lot. How do we get there, and how do we get out of that, Bob?
Well, I think that there's actually a lot of activity around that, currently, and I think that we took a step in the right direction with the revision of our standards back in 2014. And I was involved in the original standards from 1994 that were released. But the revision in 2014 that organized things around the four artistic processes or processes was really important for us here in the United States, because it allowed us to really articulate what is a comprehensive education in the arts. What does that look like? And to your point, you're talking about the aspect of the performance aspect of arts education. And that's the thing that most people are aware of. That's what they see. That's what they think about. But there's also the creative aspect. So, create, perform, respond, connect being those processes, all of a sudden, changes the conversation, because you're not just talking about the performance aspect of it. So I think that was a step in the right direction from a policy standpoint. I think that we're still struggling with implementation now, 12 years on since they were released. But I do think that is something that has been helpful. And I think that the other thing that is changing is that there is a recognition that we need to open all the doors and windows, in the arts, to let everyone in whatever way resonates with them. And I've often talked about this on the music side in particular, and I think Mr. George will remember this when we did some of our early data analysis in the state of Wisconsin. That we were looking at some of the data, and I was looking at what was happening with high school arts enrollment across the different disciplines. And it seemed like every year that music was shedding students, not fewer ninth grade, eighth or ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade at the high school level, that number was flat and then kind of declining. But for some strange reason, the visual arts had kind of a hockey stick where it was kind of flat, 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 and then 12th grade, boop, went way up. And it was just like, and for the life of me, I had no idea why is that happening.
Mm.
And then in talking to folks, I think it was Julie Palkowski at the state, and I think it was even a conversation with Mike. It's like, well, that's because visual arts have a course that's available for students that they can take where there's not a prerequisite, versus and I talk about this all the time when you start in music, particularly on the instrumental music side, and depending on the state, here in New Jersey, we start our kids in fourth grade. So they get on the merry-go-round in fourth grade, and then you turn the merry-go-round and it starts spinning. And as the merry-go-round is spinning, kids are falling off. But we never stop the merry-go-round to let more kids get back on again. We just keep spinning them off and off and off because we don't provide these entry opportunities for kids that want to come in the eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade. And that's been a real issue in the music education community because of that particular process. And that's why we've talked about oftentimes, where are those newer programs? What are those other doors and windows that somebody that didn't start in fourth grade, but now is in ninth grade at high school and they want to come in? How do we let them in? Right. And that's why I talk about we have to open up all the doors and windows. And that means the different types of genres, the different type of, creative arts applications. So that in music, it's not just band, orchestra, and choir. And again, those are valuable and really, really important programs that we have. But what about the student that doesn't speak to? What about the student that wants to come in because they play guitar, or they play keyboard, or they do music tech, or they're beatboxing, or they come in through a rap door, or it's mariachi for some students, or whatever it happens to be. The idea of opening up doors and windows for more students has become more and more of a priority, and we're seeing states beginning to address that in things like teacher licensure, making sure teachers are trained across a variety of content areas within music, not just those traditional pathways. And again, that's not to devalue those pathways. They remain robust and where the most of our students actually participate. But there are certainly other students that those programs don't speak to. And we need to find what those programs are and not only make them available, but make them available at scale so that those students have the opportunity to participate as well.
Bob, that was so funny. I was going to preempt my question with a story. I'll give you a glimpse into it. When I was in Newfoundland back in the 80s, I'd been invited onto this curriculum development committee with the Department of Education, and we were developing the grade 10 band curriculum. It was the first year program, and the very first thing on the agenda was prerequisites. And so they're all having a big conversation about this, and I put my hand up and said, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by prerequisites. And they said, well, that's the kids need to have had experience before. And I said, well, hang on a second. Outside of the capital city, most kids don't get any music. And so that's not their fault. And they said to me, but it's not our fault either. And we're living in an era of standards. I was unceremoniously, I stand to this day, I think, to be the only person in that province to have been dumped off a committee. They fired me. They later on re-invited me, but I declined gratefully.
Well, that reminds me, and some of the folks here that I've heard Ken speak about this will know this particular story, but it's really important, and it's around standards, right? You talked about there are standards, and and McDonald's has standards, right? And he would say McDonald's has standards that you know what you're going to get. It's all the same, and in his words, it's all awful, right? But it's standard, it's standardized, right?
Yep.
versus he would talk about, and then you have the standard based on the Michelin standard, the Michelin guide for restaurants. And that there, they had the standards, but the restaurants were all different and they were all amazing, right? And that's the difference between having standards that provide the opportunity for creativity and innovation versus standardization where you're just stamping out the same thing over and over and over.
Magic. Yeah. I love that.
I'd like to apologize to McDonald's. That's one of our sponsors this evening. And no, I'm just kidding.
Other franchises are available.
Yeah, we got no sponsors. Bob, can you finish this statement? Creativity will flourish in the future in our schools if what happens?
Well, I think that, to Peter's earlier point, because I think that we have to put it in the context of where we are today and what is happening today. This idea that we're in this era of AI that has been, I mean, let's face it, this has been thrust upon us, right? There was no vote. There was no people saying, hey, is this a good idea or not a good idea? These companies started making these LLMs and then they started competing with each other and then they started releasing stuff. And if you tried to avoid AI and you use anything that is plugged in, you can't do it. It has now been embedded into everything that we use on the technology side. And even if you don't, if you make a phone call to somebody, the good chance is that it's being routed through some sort of AI center that's being monitoring it and transcribing the call and sending that off to somebody, else to address. So I think that we have to understand it within the context of what it is that we're dealing with today. And oh, by the way, this actually reminds me of social media because we played the same game with social media. All of a sudden we just let it loose, no governance, no regulations. It's everywhere. No one's responsible. No one's accountable. And now all of a sudden we're learning all the serious negative impacts that that social media is having on our students and on their mental health. We don't know the impact that AI is going to have, yet we are unleashing it on the masses like one big, giant human experiment. So I think what's important to understand, we talked about this earlier, is context and knowledge and being able to discern information is going to be critical. You have to have, in order to operate in an AI environment, you have to have a knowledge base to begin with. That as a person that you can rely on when you're examining AI generated content. And it's what's interesting about this is that Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, who is now the largest of the chip, manufacturers, the AI chips that are out there, he's spoken very eloquently about the importance that creativity will play in this new environment. And he has championed the arts and creativity as vital and that these enduring human skills are necessary in the AI era. And he argues that fields like design and journalism and the arts, the liberal arts, will remain deeply relevant because artificial intelligence functions as a tool to enhance human storytelling, taste, and purpose rather than to replace them.
Yeah.
And I think that if we want to know what we need to pay attention to, some of these leaders have actually been, more thoughtful and eloquent about it, which is why you're starting to hear that they're hiring artists and they're hiring philosophers and they're hiring some of these other people. And again, it's because of this idea that the machines cannot find solutions that are not predictable, and that's where human capacity comes into place. So I think that paying attention to that and making this case, and I think that this is where the challenge lies because I don't think we're making the case yet effectively, and I think that until we do that. that things that are happening can, we could very easily be overtaken by the events that are occurring right now.
There's a wonderful satirist from Newfoundland who said way before AI, he said, "Boy, you can't do nothing if you ain't got nothing to do nothing with." And I think to take those words now, the way I think of it is, what better way but to introduce our kids to the arts and to thinking and to philosophy, um, and then they got something to do something with. Sure, they're going to come into contact with AI, but it's them that has to bring the stuff to AI. We can't just let them loose on AI when they've got nothing. Boy, it's a conundrum, isn't it? Chris, can I make a suggestion? I wonder
Please.
if any of our guests here have got a question for Bob.
Oh, I think that'd be lovely. You can either raise your hand, your little virtual hand or real hand, or you can throw it in the chat too. We could do it that way as well.
Steve Georgopoulos, don't tell me you don't have a question.
Bob,
Yeah.
I'm going to look for that article on Monday. So I'm a serial volunteer and I'm a fan of Peter Gamwell's, full disclosure. And I've read both of
I
his
won't hold
books.
that against you.
Thank you. So what can I do as someone who's very concerned with the world of education? There's a bit of selfishness there because I have 4 grandchildren and one that was born during COVID. And I could get emotional right now, but he didn't get a hug for 9 months because we had these things called bubbles, right? Can't have more than 6 people, and there's 10 of us. So what's the prescription for a guy like me, a retired career hotelier who cares a little too much? What can I do?
So, I think the first thing that you do is you look at your spheres of influence. All right. So based on where you are, and I don't know where you live, and I don't know, what country or anything else, but I often say, look for the spheres of influence. So, who is it? What organizations, people, companies, institutions that you may have, relationships or within your sphere of influence that you can begin to have some conversations about this particular topic, and particularly if you happen to be in the community or near the community where your grandkids are growing up, really try to have some conversations with folks that are in that community to understand what is it that education system and those education leaders are thinking about. And then what I would do is, once you understand what they're thinking about and where they're coming from, begin to, craft a way to start to educate them about what is happening and how to really look at the needs of the students today and how to prepare them for a world that none of us can foresee in the future. And I think that if you start with the spheres of influence, you can actually begin to bring other people in to work with you as part of the same cause, so that it's not just, hi, I'm Steve and I'm here to talk about this, but all of a sudden it's Steve and Steve's friends and Steve's business colleagues and Steve's social club friends and folks from the golf course or wherever it happens to be, wherever they are. All of a sudden, you've created a little bit of a movement of people that are paying attention and bringing their voice, to the education system. And I will say this: most of the people that are in our education system and running our education system are doing so with good intentions. Yeah. So I think that, oftentimes people will come in with flamethrowers and just spitting fire at them, as opposed to coming in and just being thoughtful and asking questions. And, because most of them want to learn. they want to know what they can do to make the education for their students better. So I think that by just starting small, what are my spheres of influence, understanding what the system is like so you understand what, if anything, you're trying to make different, and then begin to go at it by bringing others into the conversation as well.
That's a $10 million response. Thank you ever so much.
I will send you my direct deposit information to my bank account.
It's going to be in Canadian funds.
Chris, we just fixed the data project.
We got the data project. I was going to say, we got that all figured out for you, Bob. So Bob, how can people follow you? And, like you were talking about the article and so on, but where can people find your writing and so on?
So you can find me at bobmorrison.substack.com. That's where I'm posting all of my writing right now. There's a whole series of articles that I did, on the current threats that we're facing here in the United States with public education. And then I did another series, a 9-part series on the founding discipline, basically making the case for the role that the arts have played in the education system across all organized education systems throughout humanity. And I think going back 5,000 years, and it started, and this one started with a very simple question of, addressing this idea of back to basics, right? We're in this back to basics mode again, and people are going, we've got to go back to basics. And I'm like, oh, okay. Where are we going back to? Right? Are we going back 20 years to 1990s when the arts became a core subject in the United States? Are we going back, to the early 1980s, when there was a nation at risk? Are we going back to Sputnik, which actually started all of this here in the United States? Are we going back even further than that? And as I started going back further and further and further and looking at where is the point that music and the arts entered the education system, it took me back 5,000 years.
Yeah.
And I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned because I had no idea. This was just a lark. Where are we going back to? And it turns out that wherever you look in education for any of the major educational systems and major civilizations across the millennium, music and the arts were always fundamental. And I think that's going to be an important part of reminding people that, again, the arts are not just part of this instrumental process of creating jobs and other things, that it's about creating the type of humans that we want. So in any event, bobmorrison.substack.com. You can go there, sign up. And again, I'll have this new article on Monday that really is talking about why instrumentalism doesn't make any room for musical instruments. So.
Well, this evening would not be complete if we didn't hear from Sir Ken himself. So here is a 2 minutes of Sir Ken, which I think is an appropriate message for what we're about to hear. Here we go.
Squander them pretty ruthlessly. I had a great story recently, I love telling it, of a little girl who was in a drawing lesson. She was 6 and she was at the back drawing, and the teacher said this little girl hardly ever paid attention, and in this drawing lesson she did. And the teacher was fascinated. She went over to her and she said, "What are you drawing?" And the girl said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But nobody knows what God looks like." And the girl said, "They will in a minute." Kids will take a chance. If they don't know, they'll have a go. Am I right? They're not frightened of being wrong. Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. And I think we can't afford to go on that way. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely, and the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are, and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it.
Profound, right? It just doesn't get any better. It is exactly what we need to hear. My thanks to Bob Morrison for being with us. Show him some emoji. I don't know. Use AI. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciated your wisdom and your companionship in all of this, and your leadership, honestly, is just thank you. And to my dear friend, Peter Gamwell, thank you, sir, for being here as well. This would not be the same without you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Bob. And thank you, everybody else, for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for spending an evening with us, everyone. And again, look for the recording of this to go up on the DPI website in the next 3 to 4 years when I, you know how that goes. No, I'll get it up there next week for sure. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.